Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Ron.
In our top story, U.S. President Joe Biden has continued his attack on Israeli leaders and has called the biblical values that they represent extremist. Biden claims that some members of Israel's government are the most extreme he has ever seen, and that encouragement for Jewish settlements in the biblical heartland is part of the problem. The U.S. has been very vocal in its opposition to the current Israeli coalition. Many members who have spoken out for biblical values have been accused of intolerance and fanaticism. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been snubbed by the president, who has repeatedly refused to invite him to the White House, and members of the Israeli Knesset have been shunned by the administration and have not been invited to events at the U.S. Embassy in Israel. Biden acknowledged that the Palestinian Authority has lost its credibility and has become a vacuum for extremism, but he insisted that Israel's ultimate security rests on what he calls the two-state solution, which ultimately means dividing the Promised Land and making another Arab terror state in the Middle East alongside and within Israel. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's Minister of National Security, responded to the president's remarks, saying the land of Israel is for the people of Israel, according to the Torah of Israel.
Moscow is reportedly mediating negotiations for the release of an abducted Jewish doctoral student who was kidnapped by an Iranian-backed militia group in Iraq. Elizabeth Surkov is a dual Russian-Israeli national. She was in Iraq doing field work for her doctorate and academic research on behalf of Princeton University in the United States. Her research on Iranian militias has taken her to Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. She is reportedly being held by the Iranian-backed paramilitary group Kataib Hezbollah. A London-based Arabic newspaper claims Tehran set up the abduction of the Israeli researcher to pressure Israel into releasing a detained member of its Revolutionary Guard Corps who was nabbed on Iranian soil in June by the Mossad. The terrorist was planning major attacks on Israelis and Jews in Cyprus.
The Palestinian Authority has rejected an offer of Israeli assistance, which would keep it from declaring bankruptcy and effectively collapsing. The PA is notorious for its misuse of funds. Its leaders live in lavish mansions and stash hundreds of millions of dollars in foreign bank accounts, while the Arab people under their control suffer. The PA funnels hundreds of millions of dollars into its pay-to-slave program, where it pays monthly stipends to the families of terrorists. Analysts believe that the collapse of the PA could cause further instability and unrest throughout Judea and Samaria. The Israeli Knesset offered to assist the PA on the condition that it halt the payments to terrorists, cease illegal construction, and stop its activities against Israel in the international arena. These conditions were vehemently rejected by Palestinian leaders who pledged to use every last penny to pay the families of terrorists.
The proposed land bridge, which would stretch from the United Arab Emirates to Israel via Saudi Arabia and Jordan, has advanced in the planning stages. The U.S.-backed Land Connectivity by Trucks is an above-ground land corridor and is intended for cargo and shipping between the Gulf of Dubai and Israel's Haifa port. The Jewish News Syndicate reported that Israel's foreign ministry and the U.S. government released a report on the project, which details significant reductions in transit time as well as expense. It says that shipping would be reduced from several weeks to just 2 or 3 days, and it described a savings of up to 20% in transportation cost.
The United States Special Envoy for Iran has been stripped of his security clearance and placed on unpaid leave while the FBI investigates his possible mishandling of classified documents. The investigation into Robert Malley began over a month ago when the State Department began an internal investigation into his conduct. Malley reportedly met with the Iranian ambassador to the UN several times in an attempt to jumpstart negotiations on its rogue nuclear program. This was likely the first direct contact between U.S. and Iranian officials since 2018, when then President Donald Trump withdrew from the JCPOA nuclear agreement, which he fondly referred to as the worst deal in history.
An Afghani national was arrested for planning a terror attack on Israel's newly inaugurated embassy in Baku, Azerbaijan. Authorities say that Fazan Mosa Khan intended to use explosives in order to harm as many people as possible. Israel and Azerbaijan have been working to expand diplomatic ties, making the country, which sits on Iran's northern border, a target of the Islamic Republic. Analysts believe that the suspect in this case could be a foreign operative working for Tehran.
The state of New Hampshire has become the 37th U.S. state to ban investment in companies that boycott Israel. Governor Chris Sununu signed an executive order barring his state from doing business with any entity that participates in the anti-Semitic boycott, divest, and sanctions movement. Gilad Erdan, Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, attended the signing and praised Governor Sununu for his bold decision, which he said was creating an economic iron dome that ensures our shared progress and prosperity.
The British Broadcasting Corporation has found itself in more hot water over its biased anti-Israel reporting. Last December, the British Parliament initiated an investigation into bias in the media giant's coverage of Israel. And in a recent interview with former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, Anjana Gadgil falsely claimed that Israeli forces are happy to kill children. The reporter was referring to a recent military operation in which 11 terrorists were killed in Jenin. 4 of them were under the age of 18. Bennett clarified that all of the casualties were armed combatants involved in terrorism. Numerous organizations, including the International Legal Forum, were outraged at Gadgil's comment and demanded that the BBC hold their network and anchors accountable for distorting the reality of the conflict, as well as inciting the public by perpetrating the blood libel and fueling the already surging wave of anti-Semitism worldwide.
A Jewish Israeli student was brutally stabbed in New York City in a suspected hate crime. The young man was walking in the Crown Heights neighborhood when he was approached by 2 men who asked if he was Jewish. They proceeded to stab him with a screwdriver multiple times. There has been more than 100 anti-Jewish hate crimes reported in New York so far this year. In 2022, there were 262 confirmed hate crimes against Jews in New York City, totaling nearly half of all hate crimes that year.
The newly improved David Sling medium-range air defense system has excelled during a series of recent tests of its expanded capability. A joint statement released by the Israeli Air Force and the Defense Ministry explains that David Sling faced off against advanced threats, expanding the system's capability and significantly improving the air defense layers of the State of Israel. It added that the existing capabilities of the system were tested in a number of challenging scenarios, which proved the effectiveness of the defensive weapon during the conflict.
Israel's esports team has been permitted entry into Saudi Arabia to participate in the video gaming competition of the FIFA World Cup. Riyadh does not hold diplomatic ties with Jerusalem, but the Royal Kingdom allowed the national team to enter on their Israeli passports to participate in the games for the first time ever. Team manager Svika Kosman said that he worked with FIFA to ensure that his group would be allowed to participate in the event.
1,000 Jewish teenagers from all over the world have come to Israel for the JCC Maccabi Games, which is the largest annual Jewish sporting event in the world. Hundreds of young Jewish athletes traveled from all over the globe to join 300 Israeli competitors. Following the games, the young people will participate in a 2-week educational tour of Israel to strengthen the teens' Jewish identity.
Jews around the world have begun the period known as the 3 weeks, which is observed by fasting and mourning for the destruction of Jerusalem, both Jewish temples, and numerous other calamities. This somber period culminates with the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, which falls this year on July 27th. Tisha B'Av is known as the worst day on the Hebrew calendar, and most Jews spend the day fasting, praying, and repenting. During the 3 weeks, observant Jews abstain from celebrations, music, dancing, shaving, and the consumption of red meat. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host Josh Reinstein and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Dan Diker. He's the president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Dan, thanks for being on the show.
Good to be with you.
Tell our viewers a little bit about what is the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs.
Josh, Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs today is the Middle East trusted address for national security, diplomacy, and communications. In Arabic, in Farsi, in English, we are trying to connect this renewable energy Middle East, this Middle East that's emerging in a completely new way from what was in the past. And as our Bahraini friend said the other day, we like to see you as the non-government address for us to understand Israel as an indigenous player in this ancient and complex fabric called the Middle East.
A few months ago, you had a historic event where you brought leaders from Africa and the Arab world together to Jerusalem. Can you tell us about that?
Unprecedented moment. It was a watershed moment, Josh, for the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. And I do think for the Middle East, we brought for the first time in Israel's history 30 Arab and African countries to Jerusalem, including some without diplomatic relations with Israel.
Wow, it's pretty amazing. And you talk about quite a bit the new relationship with the Arab world, the new relationship with the moderate Islamic world. Can you tell us where that's heading?
There's a new relationship between Israel and the Arab world and Africa for several reasons. One, there is one common adversary to Middle East and North Africa and even sub-Saharan Africa. That is called the Islamic Republic of Iran and their proxies Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, and Hamas. As well as the Houthis in Yemen. They are crawling through the Sunni Arab majority Middle East and Africa. You've got Hezbollah crawling through Africa. You've got China buying up large swaths of African states that can't afford to pay the debt service on loans that they've taken from China. And now you have this very strange return to diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran for very specific reasons. But at the same time, everyone is looking at Israel for its innovation, for its technology, for its entrepreneurship, and its capabilities that punch way above its weight as a country that is no larger than the state of Maryland.
You know, the Biden administration, we report on this quite a bit on this show, is constantly trying to get back into a terrible deal with Iran to allow them to get nuclear weapons, if not now, in a couple of years. Why are they cozying up to Iran at a time where all of Africa and the Middle East is looking for leadership?
Josh, a Kurdish friend of mine has said, why is it that the United States always gets the Middle East wrong? And one expression of getting it wrong is trying to convince a messianic extremist regime like the Islamic Republic of Iran, who publicly dedicates itself to the extinction and the erasure of one of the smallest countries in the world, the state of Israel, much similar to its former fellow traveler, the Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime. And the United States truly believes, that it can rein in an ideologically messianic extremist regime and try to tame it. It won't happen. My Kurdish friends and my Arab friends are saying they don't understand why the United States is not listening to the Arab world when the Arab world says you can't tame this wild tiger called the Islamic Republic of Iran. But what the Arab world is saying is Israel very much has the answer. They've got the technology, we've got the weaponry, we've got the military, we've got the systems, we've got the intelligence, we've got the know-how. So it is really curious, just to follow up on your question, why the United States doesn't listen more closely to its Arab friends and allies, which it's had a relationship with since 1945.
You know, everyone's talking about the possibility of peace in Israel with Saudi Arabia. What do you think is going to happen with that?
One of the tendencies, Josh, in the free world is to talk a lot about things like normalization and peace and as Isaiah and Jeremiah had talked about the lion lying down with the lamb. What is happening already in the Middle East is normalization de facto. It would serve everyone's interest to talk less about normalization and behave as if normalization is already taking place in a staged way. By the way, there are overflights over Saudi Arabia. There are Israeli offices in Saudi Arabia opening up in law, in technology. The permission is being given by Mohammed bin Salman to different business people as well as journalists in order to cooperate with Israel. So there is normalization happening, but it needs to happen quietly and less loudly.
Dan, there are literally tens of millions of people watching the show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
To our wonderful Christian friends around the world, come to the land of Israel, the Holy Land. Innovation, technology, history, the Bible, it's all unfolding before our very eyes the way the prophets of Israel had prophesied 2,000 years ago. It's happening, and Israel is waiting for you. It's your second home. We welcome you.
Thank you, Dan, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
Up next, the return to Zion with Karen Hayesod.
Shalom and welcome to the Return to Zion with Karen Hayesod. I'm Sam Grundwerg, World Chairman of Karen Hayesod, the leading official fundraising organization for the State of Israel. Israel is once again a light unto the nations since its creation. Let's watch together and marvel in what God has been able to do in such a short period of time.
In just a few short years from now, for the first time since the destruction of the Second Temple, more Jews will once again be living in Israel than in the rest of the world combined. This incredible milestone is a testament to the truth of God's prophecy, the determination of the Jewish people, and the hard work of Karen Hayesod, which for the past 90 years has dedicated itself to returning the Jewish people home. After the Roman army ransacked Jerusalem in 70 AD, the Jewish nation was scattered throughout the four corners of the earth. But each generation kept faith and dreamed of returning to their ancient home. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand forget her skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you. Over the centuries, a tiny remnant of Jews constantly remained. By 1800, just 24,000 lived in their homeland, while untold millions built Jewish lives across the globe. Throughout the following 2 centuries, the ingathering of the Jewish people gradually became reality. In the land of Abraham and of King David's ancient kingdom, the Jewish people finally fulfilled Jeremiah's prophecy. There is hope for your future. Your children will return to their borders. The first wave of Jews arrived in the late 19th century, mainly from Russia and Yemen, pioneering some of modern Israel's most familiar cities. Soon before the First World War, they were joined by Jews fleeing the pogroms of Tsarist Russia. They founded the very first kibbutz and revived the ancient biblical language as modern Hebrew. During the 1920s, as Europe was reshaped in the aftermath of war, Jews continued to find refuge in the Holy Land, fleeing from growing anti-Semitism. Crucial to these efforts was the work of Karen Hayesod supporters, who had galvanized Jewish communities and their friends across the world in an effort to see Jews return home. This was critical in helping hundreds of thousands of Jews escape the dark clouds of Europe as the horrors of Nazi Germany became a reality. By the outbreak of World War II, the Jewish population of Israel had swelled to 250,000. This number swiftly grew during the late 1940s as the survivors of humanity's darkest hour headed to the only place they could call home. As the world reeled from the shock of Nazism, Jews were forced to flee persecution once more, this time from the Middle East and North Africa. With around 900,000 Jews expelled or forcibly removed from Arab countries between 1948 and 1970, they arrived destitute in the fledgling state of Israel, eventually playing a major role in its development. Israel has continued determinedly to rescue Jews from danger. Tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews were airlifted to safety in the 1980s and early 1990s. In the following years, as the Soviet Union collapsed, almost 1 million Jews made the journey to Israel. With the help of Keren Hayesod supporters, they have made new lives in the land of their forefathers. 2 millennia after the Roman destruction, we believe more Jews will soon once again be living in Israel than outside of Israel. They will be living in a thriving, independent Jewish state. Finally, as Zechariah predicted, old men and women will sit in the streets of Jerusalem, filled with boys and girls playing. Join us in making this dream a reality. Bible-believing Christians around the world have a role to play in the fulfillment of this biblical prophecy. Thus says the Lord God, "Behold, I will lift up my hand to the nations and set up my standard to the peoples, and they will bring your sons in their arms, and your daughters will be carried on their shoulders."
Let's bless Israel together.
Now's the time for you to get involved. Assist Keren Hayesod to raise the necessary funds in order to bring Jews yearning for their homeland back to Israel. Your donation can help fulfill the biblical prophecy today. To donate and get information, visit our website at www.khisrael.org.
And now, shining light from Israel.
For 1,100 years, Sussita, on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, was a busy, bustling, bubbling metropolis, and there was almost nothing like it here in the area. So behind me is the hilltop of Sussita, and Sussita means horse in Aramaic. All Roman cities needed lots of water, not just for drinking, but they needed it for entertainment. So what we're looking at here is elaborate plumbing from the Roman era, 1st century, where you see this is a plug and socket joint. So this is the plug, and you can see on the other side of it the socket. So each one plugs into the other, and each one is a nice link, and they join together. They put a bit of mortar around it, waterproof mortar, and that way they seal the piping so it could get up the hill under the pressure of gravity that came from the hill above Sussita. So on my right is what's called the Round Tower, a 3-story tower that guarded one side of the gate to Sussita. The heart of every Roman town has a cardo, except here. The north-south axis is very narrow. At its widest bit, it's 200 metres. So the Romans very sensibly said, no cardo here, we're just going to have a decumanus. And this is called a decumanus maximus, because it was the main drag of Sussita. So we're standing in the nave of the cathedral, facing east, as nearly all churches do. There are dozens of granite columns here that have fallen on the ground. Every granite has its own mineral imprint. We know that these granite columns came from nowhere else other than the Upper Nile in Egypt. And if you look at the way they fell, we learn a lot about the geography of the region, because we're on the Syrian-African rift, and we know the eastern side moves northwards faster than the western side. So what happened here was, in the earthquake of 749, This side moved northwards. I'm facing north. Therefore, these columns all fell backwards. They all fell in one direction. This is exactly how they were found. This was a huge cathedral of enormous proportions. There must have been an enormous Christian community here in Byzantine times to justify not just this cathedral and a bishop to boot, but another 6 churches along the way. The jewel in the crown, however, of Sussita is not the cathedral and the other 6 churches, but a baptismal area. Follow me. So in front of me you can see how large this baptistery must have been. Richly endowed mosaic floors, many more granite columns. So this was a large hall, a large auditorium devoted to baptism. And we see a lead pipe. Water comes gushing out of here from the plumbing that we've already described into the baptismal font, which is here just below me. We presume that people came in the 4th century at the start of accepted Christianity in the Roman Empire. They came here in their thousands to be baptized. The baptisarium is enormous. There's nothing like it in the whole Middle East, perhaps in all of Christendom. The Decumanus Maximus is behind me and spills into the Forum, which was a vibrant place full of commerce, industry. There was a marketplace. It was open air and very Roman. And alongside the Forum, which was an open air structure, there was a basilicum. Before the cathedrals of Europe, the Romans built structures like this, which they called basilica, to the king, right? That's the translation of basilica. Commerce and industry in the rain and the cold weather can leave the Forum and move into the basilica, but it's a public structure. And nothing has been spared here. On all 4 sides there were columns. Part of the extravagance of the basilica here was the stucco. This is diagonally fluted stucco. So this was beautifully coloured, huge building to serve the public. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming to Sussita. Perhaps this will give you the incentive to make it a real visit, to put your feet actually on the ground, not only to Sussita, but so many places within Israel that are like it, rich in history that goes back thousands of years to biblical times. We'd love to see you.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebecca Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan El Rome, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Please join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.